Woo! You made 12 people lose the powers of their speech.
I did.
Again, this is Edinburgh. On the weekends, most people here eventually lose the power of their speech quite nicely. That's not very magical, right?
Finally,
Something good.
the third and final charge. I was accused of summoning the devil, Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Buhuu, the Prince of Darkness himself, Ozzy Osbourne, and Bite Betty Curry. Ooh! Just decide. Ooh! Just decide. Ooh! I was
You got mad with power, Agnes. Right. So, you summoned Satan all the way up to Edinburgh.
I did.
And all you could think of making him do was bite someone called Betty. I mean, do you even know who Betty was?
Yeah, yes.
Who was she?
She was a lady.
Oh, really? I never would have guessed. Do you know where she was bitten?
On the wrong house.
Did she?
Yeah,
very good. Right, well, for these 3 charges and the 17 others which have slipped Agnes's mind, she was found guilty of witchcraft and she was executed just like our friend was, wherever she is, back in old Edinburgh. But had she survived even a few more years, she would have died of the plague anyway, so it's not that big of a loss. But despite the fact that she was burnt at the stake, she has made quite a startling recovery.
Thank you.
I like the dress, Agnes.
Thank you. It's the summer sale on comes in men's sizes too, apparently.
If you're interested, I mean, I saw you kind of eyeing her up, yeah. Actually, mind you see that guy there's been winking at you. Hands in the pockets. Could be a bit of a winker, you never know. Right, Agnes, you're being disgusting, okay? You're being horrible, right? Just get lost. We don't want you here. Get your rubbish and leave. Go.
Oh no, but I had such a lovely time.
Oh, really?
Oh, I know, I brought them a present.
A present?
Yes, always here.
Oh, very good. Do you all want a present? I'm just going to stand back for this part because I don't know what this present is. Oh no, Agnes! Agnes, that's the you're supposed to get me wet! Is it time for present number 2?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. That's right, take your rubbish and get lost. A big hand for Agnes Vinny. Very hairy Agnes Vinny. Right, now, sorry, actually I should ask, did anyone get a bit wet there by any chance? Right, if you did, whatever you do, don't taste it, okay? Because Agnes shouted out the words "gardy-loo," which comes from a French phrase meaning "watch out for the water." But that isn't really water. Inside that bucket was all of the daily number 1s, number 2s, even number 3s! Which is a 1 and a 2 mixed together inside the bucket. Okay, anyway, if you ever hear a cry of "gardy-loo" when you're in Edinburgh, just run, okay? So you never know what's going to happen. Anyway, right, before she left, Agnes did give us this rather nice present. Does anyone know what this is? Stocks, very good, yes, it's the Stocks mobile pillory, which is used in a lot of executions to fit around people's necks. Now, this was used in the execution of a man called Walter, Earl of Atholl. Now, has anyone ever heard the Macbeth story by William Shakespeare, yeah? Well, apparently his story is based on the Earl of Atholl's true story. You see, the Earl of Atholl was a noble here in Scotland who, more than anything else, desired to be the king. But there was a problem. He was very low on the line of ascension. He was never going to naturally become the king. So to speed up the process, he got a team of assassins to sneak into Edinburgh Castle and kill James I. And they were successful. But when the king came marching through to Edinburgh to claim his throne, he was instead arrested, put on trial for the crime of regicide, that's killing the monarch. Now, killing the monarch is a horrible crime. We had to give him an equally horrible punishment. So we gave him one. His execution lasted 3 entire days! Ooh, that's what he said as well. 3 days. And it goes a little bit something like this. On the first day, the Earl was dragged out here into Parliament Square. He was then stripped completely naked. He then had his wrists bound behind his back, tied to his ankles, and he was lifted just like the witches were 20 feet into the air. But instead of having the water at the bottom to break his fall, all he had was the cobbles on the ground. So when he was dropped, his body smashed off the ground, it broke a number of his bones. He was then lifted again and dropped halfway, and he was they choked the rope, the force dislocating both of his arms. He was then lifted again and dropped, and lifted and dropped, and lifted and dropped, until finally the guy that was doing all the lifting really hurt his back, and they couldn't go on. So they decided to cut him down and locked him inside the market cross over there to give him a nice pleasant night's sleep. But it wasn't a total loss. He became the first man in Scottish history to bungee jump naked! Prove me wrong. Anyway, so they gave him a nice pleasant night's sleep. On the second day, they dragged him out here once again, and as I said before, we liked to make our punishments fit the crime. We liked to make them quite ironic. So this man really wanted to be king, so we gave him the coronation he had always wanted, with a small twist. See, they tied him down onto an iron throne, and they gave him a crown. This crown had been heated inside of a furnace till it was red hot. They then took it from the furnace, plunged it down to the Earl's head, burning the skin around his scalp. Now, as metal cools, it begins to shrink, and as it squeezed around his head, it branded the words, King of Traitors, into his forehead. When it was cool enough to touch, the executioner ripped it from his head, taking with it all of his hair, all of his scalp, all of his mousse, his gel, everything, you know. He was worth it. They then cut him down, locked him back inside the prison, gave him one final night's rest before his inevitable demise. On the third and final day, he was dragged out here once again, and he was placed face first against the walls of St. Giles Cathedral. Over the course of the morning, the executioner whipped him until the skin on his back was cut and flayed. At this point, he took fistfuls of salt, which he rubbed into the Earl's wounds, causing him to cry out in pain. Fantastic. This is so painful. They then tied the Earl to, in fact, no, they then placed the Earl in this device. Does anyone want to play the part of the Earl of Atholl? No. Well, how about you then? Perfect, very good. Thanks for volunteering, very good. Right, we'll just stick this around your neck. Yeah, very good. Right, just get your wrists in the holes there. Perfect, it suits you. No, it's too big, too small for you, never mind. Oh. Well, if you've got anything nasty to say to him, you might as well do it now, because he can't really fight back. Anyway, right, so the Earl was placed in this device. He then had a spike stuck through his tongue and attached to the back of a big, smelly horse. He was then dragged up and down the Royal Mile over the course of the afternoon until he was nearly dead. Now, all the townsfolk, of course, hated him, so they all gathered up in the streets, got rotten fruit and veg, threw them at him, shouted insults like, "You hairy beast!" It was just the horse as well. When he was nearly dead, he was then brought to where we're standing today and released from the stocks. A big hand for the Earl of Atholl. Cheers. Just a small part. The Earl was then brought to where we're standing today, tied to a large wagon wheel. The executioner then took out a razor-sharp knife and cut him from his chin all the way down to his groin. At this point, they opened up his chest, began taking out his internal organs one by one. He reached in and took out his kidneys, took out his stomach, took out his intestines. Yeah, a lot of intestines. He then reached inside, took out his gallbladder, prostate, everything, until finally he plunged his hand into the Earl's chest and took out his still beating heart. He then held it aloft and shouted, "This is the heart of a traitor! Let this be a lesson to you all! Especially ye!" And I think it was a good lesson. She's still not scared, never mind. And it was a good lesson. See, the Earl's body was then cut into quarters, each section taken to a different corner of Scotland to be a warning of Scottish justice. His head and his hands were kept here in Edinburgh, put on spikes on top of the city gates. This was kind of like a welcome. See, the first thing you saw when you came through to the city was two waving hands and a smiling head on a spike. They still do this in some parts of Glasgow. So. Anyway, so this was a very successful execution. No one tried to kill the next King of Scotland for 5 whole years. Perfect. Now, anyway, in a second I'm going to take you up onto the Royal Mile once again. I'm going to take you into Riddle's Court, where I'm going to tell you about all of the invasions that have occurred here in Edinburgh. But it will unfortunately be the final stop of tonight's tour. Aww. Almost genuine, very good. Actually, before we leave, you see that group over there? They're kind of rivals with my tour group. So do you think on the count of 3 you could just